everyone, and welcome back to Oh That Girl Reads, where we read what we love and DNF the rest. My name is Bria. I am your host, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. Okay, so first off, obviously, we are in a new spot. We're in a new place. I'm now at the front of the house, so if you guys hear some weird outside noises, bear with me. I'm still trying to figure those out, but Sunshine TLC gave us this dope ass mic, so hopefully we don't have too many problems, but if you do see some things, hear some things, sorry about that. We are adjusting and yeah, we'll figure it out. Right now, you guys are actually balanced on top of my Stanley Cup in a coaster, and it's not the sexiest setup, but it works for now, and that's all we need. But today, I have a lot to talk to you guys about. Um, are these thoughts in my head completely sorted? No. But I feel like you get the best out of me when my thoughts aren't completely sorted. But before we talk about all of the things that I want to get into, I do want to let you guys know that HarperCollins is getting rid of their imprint, Inkyard. And Inkyard is an imprint known for producing various BIPOC YA literature authors. And so, what we're losing in the book community is actually something really special. So, down below, I did link a list of books created by one of the authors from Inkyard Press that has a list of all of the books that Inkyard has published by BIPOC authors. I would love it if you guys check that list out. If you guys requested at your libraries, bought it, get it on ebook, anything to support these authors, it would be greatly appreciated. It's so sad that we're losing this, but it seems like this has been a consistent pattern with the publishing industry doing huge layoffs. Penguin Random House was just doing the same not too long ago. Huge layoffs, huge discontinuing of imprints, things like that, and it's really intense and it's really sad. But yes, so thank you guys for your help and your assistance on that. But today, okay, the way my brain works is that it goes from this point to that point to that point to that point. And you'll find that when I'm talking, or if you ever speak to me in real life someday, you'll find that I'll often say, and that made me think of this. And so I actually applied for a job recently where I said the term, I call it overthinking for fun. Or overthinking for enjoyment. And that is, in a sense, what I do. I overthink for enjoyment. And so I recently finished Come As You Are. This book is by Emily Nagoski. It's about sex and sexuality and basically just like the science of sex. And so I started reading this because I struggle with um, just partner intimacy, like just like being able to relax. And I found this book on TikTok where someone was reiterating one of the ideals in the book about brakes and accelerators. And so that's what drew me into reading this book initially. But what this book kind of allowed me to do was think about sex and sexuality in a whole new type of way. And so because I was thinking about sex and sexuality, of course, I was thinking about like my romance reads, and in particular as my romance reads as of lately. And I'll go more into this when I do my review of Cruel Seduction by Katee Rober for the podcast. But I found that there is I don't want to call it a misuse of sex, because that's not true. Because what works for me might not work for someone else, and what works for someone else might not work for me. But I found that there are a lot of elements about how sex is used in certain plots that don't allow me to feel completely grounded or completely uh, satisfied within a story, and within the books that I read. And so that started to make me think about, well, in literature, sex is used in so many different ways. It's not even, it's used in so many different ways, but it's also alluded to in so many different ways. And then depending on genre to genre, it's going to look different, right? And so that's where I got hooked. That is where I got hooked. How does sex look different genre to genre? And then that made me think. That made me think of what was the transition like for me from going to reading about sex in YA literature to reading about sex in adult romance. And that's where I went on a tailspin. Okay, so recently on TikTok, there was this situation where a commenter commented on one of a book talker's like recommended videos, and I believe in the video the book she was sharing was a YA fantasy book. I could not find the video that I'm referencing right now, and so because I couldn't find it, I can't like put it up here for you, but if I do find it by chance, it'll be up here, but I promise you I looked. But I believe they were like referencing a YA fantasy book where in reality, because it's YA fantasy, it actually doesn't quite make sense for sex to be in the plot. Even if it's like YA romantasy, that's not to say that sex doesn't exist in YA. Don't start with me on that shit, okay? I know. And I know that ACOTAR and the Throne of Glass series were also once YA. But have you noticed that they have been remarketed and rebranded as adult fantasy, adult romantasy? I actually think they're adult fantasy. Truly. I think that's how they're categorized now. But anyway, because technically there's really no such thing as romantasy. I think that's like a made up thing by us. Did we make that up? Someone let me know if we made that up because I feel like we did. But yes, so I understand ACOTAR, whatever. And technically, what was that one? What was that from Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout? I get it. I get it. I get it, guys. I know. But they are no longer considered that. Okay? So we're going based off of that information. Um, but you'll find that. Where was I even going with that thought? You'll find that it's talked about so differently and showed so differently between sex. I mean, showed so differently between YA and adult romance or adult literature, anything. And so when that person was kind of like commenting on that other TikToker's video and just being like, is this spicy? And when the TikToker responded, it opened up this whole new conversation about like, why do we feel like a book needs to have spice in order for it to be enjoyable or in order for it to be worth reading? And I was thinking about that as someone who was a heavy YA reader and as someone who primarily reads romance right now. And I think personally, I think that's going to change for me a little bit. Not for any other reason. I mean, at the beginning of the year, I did my No Romance 2023. And for me, I think I was right to do that for certain personal reasons. Just because, like, it felt like I was getting sex 24/7. And I think I'm still in that kind of healing process era from my time at grad school. I think I touched a little bit on this in my No Romance of 2023 video or podcast episode, but I was in grad school and I got accepted on the basis that I would be doing work around blackness, femininity, and sexuality. And what that turned into was actually what I referred to as like self-pimping. That's not like a really, that's not a great way to refer to it. I know I'm fully aware that I'm not being the best in referring it to that, but that's what it felt like. It felt like I was always performing my own sexuality to the point that it damaged my relationship with my sexuality. I was constantly surrounded by like porn videos of sex, videos talking about sex and sexuality. I was seeing a sex therapist at the time. I was reading books about sex. I was reading books about like the history of the Black laboring body and sex. I was, oh my gosh, I was taking in like, art media about sex, and then I was using all this information and jamming my brain with all this information to create a storyline about my sexuality that in the end I don't believe to be true. I very much put myself on display. I was photographing my own body. I was writing out my own experiences. I was exposing myself, the things that I was doing in terms of like self harm, um, like not like actual like self harm, like the physical kind, but kind of like the mental kind, by exposing like my turbulent relationship with another partner and things like that. So like that's just like the tip of the iceberg of like what I was doing, and and why I decided to do no romance of 2023, at least for the beginning half of the year, which I kind of did. I think I stopped around like April-ish, maybe even March, I can't remember. But I tapered that off, and I very much just like abandoned that idea. But the reason why I started it was because of all of that. And the reason why I'm reconsidering starting that again is because of all that. And I haven't really completely healed from all of that as well. But that's to say, is that I have to rethink my relationship with romance reading. And because I have to rethink my relationship with romance reading, and I was like, well, how did I read romance when I was, only reading YA? Because there was like a point in time I read only YA until I was about 22. And then that mostly changed because I was in college classes, and naturally, because you're in college classes, you get exposed to new ideas, and the way those, maybe not new ideas, but new ways to explore certain ideas. And I think that really um, encourages you to move into like a new category of reading. But yeah, so I was thinking, I was like, okay, so like, how did I read about sex and relationships when I was only reading YA? And it occurred to me that the way sex and romance and relationship is talked about in YA is so vastly different. And it's one of those things where it's not, at least in my mind, how I experienced it. When I was reading YA, if there was a sex scene in a YA book, it wasn't meant to like titillate or to appeal or to perform for the reader, whereas in adult romance it's very much meant to get the reader like really hot and heavy. And like, you'll see it now, like people will make like TikToks, and it's like, oh, like my husband waiting for me like after I read a chapter, or like me reenacting a chapter with my husband, things like that. And which is good, it's good, fine and dandy that it's like that. But I think that's kind of one thing that might be subconsciously triggering me. And I don't even know if it's like the word trigger that I want to use, because it's not causing me any detriment. It's just making me think. It's just making me think about a whole bunch of stuff. But I think that's what's kind of getting me, is like the performance aspect of like adult romance versus the YA romance side, where like YA romance, where it's not necessarily like, not that it's like pure or watered down, it's just that it's very character focused and very intentional. um One thing, and this, I guess this is kind of like a spoiler for my review coming up, but I think this is like what made me think about this truly and deeply. But Katee Roberts' Cruel Seduction, I was reading it, and the whole time in this book, we have two characters who aren't really vibing with each other, who are really trying to destroy one another, and they do active things to destroy one another. And then one of the characters they go through something traumatic, like a traumatic event where um, their well-being is threatened. Okay. And so in that, there was a lot of potential. There was so much potential for, you know, there to be conversations, because this is a polyamorous coupling, right? There was so much potential for there to be conversations about the past, about the present, a real opportunity to ground everybody together, to like get them situated, you know what I'm saying? And to have another sort of intimacy that like binds everybody together. It was completely tossed away in favor for a threesome and what I believe a double penetration scene. And it's not that I didn't want those things, but it was the fact that like I was sitting there and I knew that this was like a really high stakes emotional moment, and my whole body tensed up because I knew that it was going to lead to a sex scene and I wasn't going to get the emotional satisfaction that I wanted. And maybe that's just like a me thing. Maybe that's just something that is a reality for me, and it's like that moment really works for other people, but it doesn't work for me. However, I feel like that moment constantly happens in a lot of romance, and especially a lot of romanticy. Like, I can see it. There's very few times where I felt like using sex as a connection point after a traumatic event in books has actually worked. Like, there's very few moments where I feel like it's actually made sense. And every time that I felt like it made sense, it wasn't in a romantasy. It was actually in like a contemporary. And I don't even enjoy contemporaries that much. Like I'm not too much of like a contemporary romance girly, but like that's the only time I've ever seen it truly work or truly make sense to characterization, to plot, to everything. Otherwise, it just feels like a cheap way to introduce like a sex scene. And usually what bothers me most is that this could happen, right? But it's never used as like an important moment. Like, it's used as like a moment to bring their sexual connection up to 1,000, but all the while their like emotional connection is at a zero. And somehow at the end of the story, I'm supposed to believe in my head that they're meant to be together, that like this is a good thing that's happening. I think that's like what bothers me, and maybe I'm not fully explaining this right, but like I think that's just what throws me off just like a little bit, is the fact that like it usually never makes sense when the thing happens. Like, what the F? Anyway, so I don't know. It just made me think. And it's not just like Katee Roberts' book that I have that problem in, it's in multiple people's books that I have that problem in. I saw it a few times in like the Akatar. No. In, okay. Specifically, the one time it made me super uncomfortable was in Nesta's story, where, and this is a spoiler alert, so if you care about being spoiled for this, but Nesta has a full-on breakdown, and she's finally talking about everything. She's talking about how she feels like everything's her fault. She feels just like so fucked up and everything. And then Cassian has sex with her. And it's at their most vulnerable moment. And I think the reason why, like, I think it finally just, like, set me off this time is because in Katee Roberts' Cruel Seduction, one of the characters says, so whose bright idea was it to fuck the vulnerable, traumatized woman? And it's said jokingly, but that shit's not a joke. And then, like, the character who finally brings up the fact that that's like kind of like, what the fuck, why did you do that, just brushes it off later. I'm like, what? Like, that was the only time we were going to acknowledge how fucked up that was, and we're just moving on from it. And what I think makes that situation kind of worse for me, and in the fact that they just moved on from it, was the fact that everyone pointed out how out of character it was in the behavior that the traumatized character was acting in. Like, you all see how out of character she is being, and yet the first thing is the solution of, oh, you know what? They should just, like, have sex and make up. What? In what universe? I don't know. Despite that, though, I did actually enjoy Katee Roberts' Cruel Seduction. So yeah, despite everything, all the criticisms, and you'll see in this next upcoming episode, despite all those criticisms, I actually really did enjoy Katee Roberts' Cruel Seduction. I just think that something that I desire out of like romance authors now is something that is so brilliantly done in YA romance and YA literature, and that is like the element of creating intimacy without making intimacy sex related. And don't get me wrong, I love my pure like smutty books, but I also think that, like, in particular with like Katee Roberts books, like she's moving the story in the plot and everything into like a new direction. And I think with moving things into that new direction, I think it would be actually so helpful if like intimacy and plot driven things were also separated from like sex related things. And so I don't know, like that's just kind of where I'm at. That's like where like my thinking has been lately with the things that I've been reading. I really enjoy the fact that like with YA romance, and this is something that you can really see in Cemetery Boys. Cemetery Boys, there's not like a drop of sexuality and or a drop of sex related things in it. You get a lot of like the building of that relationship, and it's not insta lovey. And I think even in like the relationships where it's supposed to be like an enemies to lover thing, like what happens with enemies to lovers is that like sex is the thing that binds them. It's the mutual attraction is the thing that binds them, which makes for really flimsy relationships. And maybe, and I don't want to say this because like I don't have much information about like polyamorous couples or relationships. Maybe in the instance of Katee Roberts' Cruel Seduction, maybe that is the point. Maybe it is that like, that relationship is flimsy and it's the other people in the relationship that kind of keep them together. But at the same time, there's also implication that they want to be together because they want to be. So I don't know. It's really confusing. But I really like that in but I feel like just like the elements of creating non-sex related intimacy in YA literature and having that be a focus, even if there is eventual sex related acts in the book, I feel like that would be such a good foundation for a lot of adult writers to kind of grasp onto, especially like independently published adult writers. That's what I've been kind of noticing, is that that's where I've been seeing this issue arise a lot, and I love indie authors. It's just that one thing. I think someone who does it really well, actually, who does like hurt and comfort really well, is Kennedy Ryan. I think there is like intensity with her scenes, but there's also like intimacy that's been built up between characters, and I think she does that really really well. Yeah, Talia Hibbert does it really well. I'm sure there's like other people out there who do it really well, and like maybe I'll like make a post about it. But yeah, I don't know, those are just have been like kind of my thoughts lately in terms of like romance and what I've been reading and what I've been digesting. I don't know, because I don't want to ever yuck someone's yum. But at the same time, I also feel like there's so many good stories that are falling victim to their sex related scenes rather than being like the master of their sex related scenes. Like it's often a critique that I have, and because I have this critique, I feel like I have to share it. And I'm still kind of learning, especially like on this like public platform, on this podcast, like how to say things in a way that is not damaging. And I think that also kind of comes from like my experience in grad school, is that I'm used to hearing um, feedback that kind of breaks your soul. And I don't ever want to be the person who's like breaking someone's soul. Obviously, like I don't think most of the authors I discuss listen to this. I listen to what I say for the most part. But if they do, I always want to come off like respectful. Or if there's like another author or writer out there who is listening to me critique something, I want them to be able to hear what I'm saying and not have their defenses up because of how I'm saying it. I also want to communicate my ideas and my thoughts really well. I never want to, I don't know, I never want to be that person who's just like talking shit, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not me. This is not, oh, that girl talks shit. It is, oh, that girl reads. And when I read, I think critically, I think deeply, even if it is, you know, romance. There's such bullshit floating around the internet talking about how like romance isn't real literature, and guess what, the only reason why you think that is because of misogyny, internalized misogyny, the patriarchy. Romance, like porn, reveals a lot about our society today. And just thinking about that now, and like me saying that, I was kind of like, well, maybe I am the person who's qualified to say these things, and maybe I should give myself a little bit more credit, because like I do think about these things, and I do think that romance is a quality and like important part of our society. And so when I do say something like, yeah, you know what, the sex related things are working against you in this instant, despite me being a sex positive person, I think that's like a fair critique. And I think I need to get used to being like, okay, this is like my critique, and I know why I'm saying this, and I'm learning how to articulate it, yes, but what I'm saying is actually important. So yeah, all that to say is that sometimes your sex scene is working against you. I think too, like everyone wants to, I think especially as like indie authors, right? I think people have been like begging Katee Rober in particular for a DP scene. And that is good. It is fine. It is dandy. Do I love a good DP? I kind of do. I appreciate it in its written work. But if it's not, and I think maybe sometimes like pressure and requests like that, because indie authors are so intimately connected to their fans, they kind of like force you, not forces you, but like it gets put on the forefront of your mind, and so then you kind of try to force it in your writing. One thing that was really interesting was I was looking at a clip from Sarah J. Maas's live, where she's talking about the threesome scene that she's written. She wrote the scene, and it was rumored that her publisher said to take out the scene, and it was between Cassian Azrael and Nesta. And in actuality, it was Sarah J. Maas who actually took it out herself, because she's like, it just didn't fit, it didn't make sense, and she's like, I kind of wish that I never mentioned that I wrote it, because now it's like what people want, and it kind of distracts a little bit. But I think she was right to do that, because when you think about it, the scene wouldn't have worked in the content of the story. In fact, I think that scene would have broke the story apart, and I think it would have actually negatively affected the stories that came after it. I know it's just one scene, but that's what I kind of mean, is that like as a writer, as an author, you're making certain decisions that affect certain things in your timeline. And like, sure, you might not see it now, but the way the readers perceive it, the way just everyone else perceives it, the way it sets up the rest of your books, it is impactful. I do fully believe that there is a way to utilize sex-related scenes, even if, like, as I think especially if you are writing something that has like a whole plot. if you're writing something that has plot and really deep emotional depth. If you're writing for the sake of, creating the nastiest, raunchiest shit you possibly can, good on you. But you can do that while also doing things that make sense to the plot. Like one thing, it's Queenie by Charmaine Wilkerson. Let me fact check. No, I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. Um, that book. Okay, so that book included some of the most intense sex scenes ever. But the way sex was used in that content wasn't to like titillate the audience or make us feel um, like it wasn't like a performance for us. It wasn't to make us feel any sort of desire. Sex was used in this context to show how Queenie was self-harming herself. It was showed to see like the just the awful behaviors of men and how men take advantage, and how men manipulate, or the manipulative relationship she was in. It was shown as a kind of a backdrop to like how bad her previous relationship messed her up, to the point where she felt like the men she was like hooking up with is what she deserved. Like that was using sex related things as a tool, and like that doesn't necessarily mean that like sex related things can only be used as something negative, but that sex related things can have the power to change your story in the long run. um I think I'm gonna wind down the episode there. I want to thank you guys for being here with me. I really appreciate you. Remember, read what you love and DNF the rest, and I will catch you guys during our review on August 4th. Thanks. Bye. So long, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. If you would like to see more, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok, Oh That Girl Reads. If you want more bookish content, feel free to check out my booktube channel, Bria L, on YouTube. Remember, read what you love and DNF the rest. Bye!